Her name was Dorothy Wexler, and she hadn't opened the front door in almost 3 decades. The house sat at the end of a forgotten lane in western Oregon, surrounded by pine trees so tall they seemed to reach into the heavens. Ivy crawled over the stone walls, moss coated the windows, and silence wrapped around the house like a second skin. To outsiders it looked abandoned. But inside, Dorothy moved softly, precisely, like a clockwork figure that had long ago lost the will to tick. She was 72. Her days were the same, structured like hymnals. Black tea in the morning, dusting her shelves in the early light, staring out the east-facing window for hours, then knitting in the evening until her eyes gave out. Her hair was always neatly pulled back, her clothes carefully ironed even though no one would see them. The rooms had not changed since 1997. That was the year she had closed the door. Her husband Walter had passed away that spring. He was 59. She remembered him slumped over the breakfast table, still holding the newspaper. There was no warning, no last words. After the funeral, people came and went, neighbors with casseroles, relatives with awkward condolences, but eventually they too stopped knocking. Dorothy never responded. She locked the door one night, slid the chain across, and from that point on, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no television in the house. No internet. Her radio collected dust in a drawer. The only sound she allowed in was the occasional call of a mourning dove or the creaking of the old wooden floor. And that suited her. In a way, it felt holy, like she had created a chapel out of grief. But time, even when ignored, keeps ticking. One afternoon in late September, something changed. It was a sound, faint at first, metal on wood. The mail slot. Dorothy had long since stopped reading mail, but the soft clink of something falling through was unfamiliar. She waited a full hour before approaching the door. There on the floor was a small envelope, cream-colored, with her full name written in cursive. Dorothy N. Wexler. She picked it up like it was an artifact, something ancient and fragile. There was no return address, just a wax seal. Inside, a single piece of paper. One sentence. You once taught me how to sing when I thought I had no voice. Please, may I come see you? No signature. Dorothy stood still for a long time. The letter trembled in her hand. Her breath caught. Somewhere deep in her bones, something stirred. A memory, a flicker of warmth, a recognition. She sat down on the floor, clutching the letter to her chest. Had to be Elise. Nearly 40 years ago, Dorothy had taught music at a small community college. Elise was one of her first students, a shy, trembling young woman with a stutter and a fragile voice. Dorothy had worked with her one-on-one, coaxing her confidence, helping her find not just pitch and tone but courage. Elise had gone on to perform in local theater. Dorothy had clipped every newspaper review. They'd lost touch when Elise moved to California. There had been a letter, maybe two, but then silence. Life had moved on. Or maybe Dorothy had stopped letting it move at all. She stared at the letter again. It wasn't dated. There was no phone number. No way to respond. For the next week she waited. She didn't know why, but she started brushing her hair again. She pulled out a soft lavender sweater she hadn't worn in years. She opened the curtains. She polished the piano keys, even though she hadn't played in a decade. Then one morning just before dawn, she heard it again, the mail slot. But this time there was no envelope. Just a knock. Dorothy froze. The knock came again, soft but persistent. She stepped forward, fingers trembling against the chain lock. Through the dusty glass she saw a figure. A woman in her late 50s. Gray streaks in her hair, warm brown eyes, a gentle smile. Dorothy. The woman called. It wasn't a question. It was a memory wrapped in skin. Dorothy unlatched the door. The first breeze in 28 years swept across her face. They didn't speak for several minutes. They just stood there, eyes glistening, decades collapsing in the space between them. Then Elise stepped forward and embraced her. That was the first day Dorothy cried in years. They sat for hours. Elise spoke of loss, of healing, of finding pieces of herself that Dorothy had once given her. Dorothy listened, then spoke of the silence that had taken her. The shame of closing the world out. The ache of a locked heart. Elise didn't judge her. She simply listened. The weeks that followed were filled with slow re-entry. Dorothy began opening windows. She walked barefoot in her garden. Elise brought her sheet music, and together they sang again, tentatively, softly at first, then louder. She even laughed. Real laugh. Startled her. One afternoon, Elise asked if she'd like to come into town. Dorothy hesitated. Just to the park, Elise said. There's music on the green. Dorothy stood by the mirror, brushing her silver hair, hands trembling. She hadn't been in public since the 90s. But she nodded. The sun felt like a stranger. The wind a child. She clung to Elise's arm as they walked the quiet path into town. People didn't stare. No one asked questions. They listened to music. Dorothy closed her eyes and let it wash over her. She went home that night and wrote her first letter in 28 years. To the woman I used to be, it began. I'm sorry I left you behind. And beneath it she signed. Dorothy and Wexler. Live again.